Hi there, so welcome to TAS Film and TV Reviews. This is my review of Task, the 2025 HBO drama, which is showing in the UK on Sky Atlantic, which is where I watched it. So there will be spoilers in this review, so if you haven't seen it yet, then please do go and watch it and then come back here afterwards. Now, Task is a 7-episode affair, and it was created and written by Brad Ingelsby, previously known for Mare of Easttown, and he also wrote the 2013 film Out of the Furnace and the 2015 film Run All Night. And Task, it stars Mark Ruffalo as FBI agent Tom Brandis. It's got Tom Pelphrey as Robbie Pendergrast and Raul Castillo as Mitch Brower, and they play bin men and part-time drug house rip-off merchants. And then it's got a wide supporting cast, including Amelia Jones as Maeve Prendergast, who is Robbie's niece, Silva Dianico as Tom Brandis' adopted daughter Emily, and then Jamie McShane as biker crew leader Perry Durazzo. And it's also worth mentioning here that Task in this context refers to the FBI task force, which is set up to investigate a series of home invasions, and that the task force itself is made up of Mark Ruffalo's Tom Brandis, and then it also features Alison Oliver as Lizzie, Tuso Mbedu as Aaliyah, and Fabian Frankel as Grosso. And broadly speaking, this is a cops and robbers drama as we follow the FBI as they investigate a home invasion gone wrong and the kidnapping of a child. And what transpires is a sort of three-way cat and mouse affair between this small group of criminals ripping off drug houses, led by Robbie, the local biker crew, the Dark Hearts, who run the local drug trade, and then the FBI task force. And in the midst of all this, we also have a young boy who is in the wrong place at the wrong time and who's then technically kidnapped following the home invasion and who sparks a massive manhunt. Now, I really enjoyed this series, and for me, what elevates this series above most of the generic police procedurals out there is the sort of complex interweaving of different themes and ideas as the story progresses. Early on, we learn that Mark Ruffalo's Tom Brandis was a priest before entering law enforcement, and that plot device serves as a conduit for many of the sort of moral and theological questions that the series throws up. And at the heart of the drama, we have this sort of central question about how people cope with tragedy and loss, and we learn that both Robbie and Tom Brandis have experienced significant loss and grief. And so we're left with this question about whether people are able to either hold or manage feelings of anger or rage, and thereby laying the foundation for forgiveness, or whether people become consumed by those feelings, leading to the need for revenge. So we learn across the series that Tom Brandis' adopted son Ethan has significant mental health difficulties, and that he killed Brandis' wife at an earlier time, and he's in prison now waiting for his sentencing. And so we see Tom Brandis grappling with these overwhelming feelings of sort of grief and anger, and we see him struggle as he ponders how and whether he can forgive. And so the viewer is left with this ambiguity as we watch Tom Brandis veering between this emotional state of either anger or forgiveness, and then the consequence of that for both his family and for the case itself. And then those themes also extend to Robbie's family as he also tries to overcome the loss of his brother in tragic circumstances. And so for Robbie, we see how these drug house heists, they go beyond the desire for wealth or for money and are actually an act of revenge against the people who wronged him, who took away his beloved brother. And there's this interesting dichotomy here between the way Brandis and the way Robbie respond to their respective situations. You know, as a British viewer, sort of our culture's steeped in class divisions, and it's something that's regularly reflected in books, films or TV programs. But it feels like class is something that's quite rarely discussed in American popular culture. And so what I think this series does so well is that it picks up on the different life outcomes and responses of people within the different social stratas. So for Tom Brandis, we see him overwhelmed by grief and pain. You know, he's probably a functioning alcoholic. But as a middle class professional, you know, a registered foster carer, he's ultimately able to keep his family together and make judgments and take decisions that go beyond his own need or his own feelings for some sort of greater good. Whereas with Robbie, we see him overwhelmed by anger and aggression. You know, we learn that he's on the edge of criminality anyway by virtue of his brother's biker gang affiliations, and so his response is coloured by that world that he lives adjacent to, you know, by his lived experience. And what's shown on screen, I think really skillfully, is that in some way, you know, each man's ultimate response to tragedy is already defined. It's like their paths are written in stone because of their social situation and their place in the social hierarchy. And then alongside that, I also really enjoyed the theological exploration of whether there's some sort of salvation for us all when it's our time to pass on. Tom Brandis and Robbie, by virtue of their life experiences, have come to the realisation that there's limited utility in faith, and they've got this almost sort of nihilistic outlook on life. And in my experience, that's a sort of common response to traumatic and painful events and situations situations. And then the way that that's explored across the series is just really well done, in my opinion. And then the theological reflections also extend beyond the two main characters, and it's something also touched on with the character Grosso. And he's in this morally ambiguous state where he's taking risky actions which he can justify in terms of the greater good, but which ultimately lead to tragedy. And over the course of the series, he has to learn that penance is not about God's judgment, but about our own, that we have to live with our own decisions as we make them. And again, I really enjoyed these reflections and the way that was painted on the screen. And then in terms of the cinematography and overall aesthetic, I really like the tone here. Visually, it really reminded me a lot of True Detective season 1. And it has that sort of pale hue, and there are frequent cutaways to the surrounding woods or to nature. And it's set in Pennsylvania, and there are numerous location shoots in state parks or other wild areas. And there are repeated scenes at an old abandoned quarry. And so we have cutaways to, childhood memories or to happier times in this natural environment. And those are then juxtaposed against these sort of gritty urban scenescapes where really all we see is just pain and anger. And that's a very powerful visual metaphor. And then I also loved that the series sort of captures the bleak social and political environment of our time. We get the austerity, the cuts to services, the hopelessness that so many of us feel in our day-to-day lives. And that notion of just people surviving. And that really jumps off the screen through both the performances and the scenescape. And so then that brings me to the performances. Pretty much across the board, they're all excellent. Mark Ruffalo is the main draw here, and he's absolutely brilliant as always. And I saw recently that he was nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Actor, and that really feels right. He's just so reliable, and his performance here really reminded me of his roles in both Dark Waters and perhaps the less well-known I Know This Much Is True, if you've ever seen either of those. And he's just got that sort of down but not quite out shtick perfected, the hangdog facial expressions, the slightly hunched over old man look, even though he's not old. And then Robbie and the supporting actors within the biker gang, and also the actors within the FBI task force were also really good. But for me, Brandis's daughter Emily and Robbie Niece's Maeve were really great in this. Obviously both young actors, and they really did well here. Maeve in particular, she really nailed the ambiguity of being sort of half in and half out of the criminal underworld of her uncle. She's just got that sort of mixture of savvy streetwise and vulnerability nailed down here, and I thought she was just really excellent. So overall, I think this was a really well done and enjoyable drama. There are so many sort of police dramas and crime procedurals out there, but for the reasons I've touched on, I think this is elevated beyond most of those, and it's really well worth a watch. So please let me know, if you've watched Task yourself, what did you make of it? But yeah, many thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.